Hi, everybody. Hope you're doing well. We continue to pray for you, continue to miss you. And I hope that as we're getting close to the end of Jesus' longest teaching in the Bible, the Sermon on the Mount, that we could look back at some of those moments of what Jesus is trying to communicate. But we have a few more weeks before we finish and begin to look back. But one thing I want you to keep in mind is I've always thought that following Jesus is not necessarily easy all the time, but it is always simple, right? It's always simple. We always really know what to do. We help people out. We love people. We forgive people. We go tell people about God. We change. We're changed, right? There's so much that in concept it's simple to do. In reality and practicality, sometimes it feels hard. It feels difficult. So maybe it's not easy, but it's simple to know what to do. And I hope that as we look at the teaching that Jesus gave us today, we'll realize it is very simple to understand, but there are going to be moments in our lives where it might not be as easy to live out. But when we get those moments that are not easy to live out, it doesn't mean it's wrong, and it doesn't mean it's worth it. Right? Some of the best things I have in my life took the hardest to attain or to achieve or to experience. A lot of times the things that matter the most are the things that we really work the hardest at, or the things we work the hardest for. So let me read for us out of Matthew chapter 7. This is verse 13 and 14. Jesus gives us this image of a narrow gate and a wide gate. And you could just imagine the narrow gate is harder to get through. A wide gate is easier to get through. It's like trying to carry furniture through a small door, right? Versus carrying furniture through a garage door. One is very easy. One is very challenging. And Jesus says this, enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. Now back then, a lot of cities would have city gates and city walls, and so there would be points of access or paths or roads that would lead up to these different gates. And the gates were sometimes different sizes, or maybe they served different purposes. But when they were closed with the walls, it brought security to the city. So this concept or idea of gates and paths leading up to the gates was really common for people hearing Jesus at this moment. So just picture with me a city surrounded by a gate and walls, and throughout the walls there's different gates that you can go in, and some gates are big, it's the main gate. Some gates are smaller, they're sort of a secondary or tertiary gate. Now those gates wouldn't be easy to get through, especially if you had a lot of stuff, especially if your load was a lot bigger. You'd go to the bigger gate because it's easy. But Jesus says in life, right, in life, that narrow gate is actually the road to life. And the broad or the wide gate is the road to destruction. And there's only a few people that find this gate and the path that leads to life. And partially is because it's narrow. Now, why is it narrow? What is Jesus really meaning? There's probably two things that Jesus is trying to point out. One, he's trying to help us understand that there's only one way to heaven. There's only one way to salvation, Him. And so there's not multiple paths to heaven. There's not multiple ways to get saved. There's not multiple ways to experience forgiveness. There's one way, right? He's the way. And so in that sense, it's very narrow. It's not multiple paths, it's one path. And that is the path to life. So there's a narrow gate. There's a narrow choice, right? There's not, if you had a multiple choice question of all the paths that lead to heaven, there would be one correct answer. That's what Jesus is saying partially with the narrow gate. Because when you find it, you find life. When you find Him and forgiveness in Jesus, you find life. The second is the point he makes about the narrow gate not being easy. That when he was instructing his followers to follow him, he often said, strive to do this, right? Strive to enter the narrow gate. Strive to follow after me. That word strive is the Greek word that we get our word in English, agonize, from. It is like the point of wrestling or pressing or working really hard to get this. Now, our salvation isn't dependent upon working at all, but it's trying to help us see that we should take it serious enough that when we struggle and strain in life, life, to follow the right path, it will lead us to life. It will bring us to the right place in life. As we get to those gates, we're not supposed to just stand and look. We're actually designed to move forward and to enter. Now, possibly you've been on the outside way too long, or maybe what Jesus is alluding to is because either of not believing or just not giving that effort or that straining when times are tough and it's not easy to follow Jesus. We end up going through the easier gate, the broader gate or the wider gate, because it's a lot easier to go that way. And because it's easier doesn't always mean it's right. And Jesus is saying that oftentimes in life, when we hit crossroads about doing the right or wrong thing, it's actually a lot easier to do the wrong thing. It's a lot easier to go with the crowd. It's a lot easier not to choose to forgive. It's a lot easier to not choose to love. It's a lot easier. It's a lot harder to forgive. It's a lot harder to say, will you forgive me? It's a lot harder to admit when we're wrong. It's a lot harder to choose to love. It's a lot harder to choose to serve, especially when the person you're serving is really hard to serve, right? And so it's a lot harder to keep going on the right path sometimes. That's why it's narrow, but stay on that path because it will bring you to life. And so what Jesus is saying is, as you stand at those city gates and you look at the options and you see the big easy gate in life, don't go that way. Because usually the easiest way is not the right way in life. Usually the right way is often the hard way, and it actually feels more like the narrow gate. And he himself is the narrow gate because he's the only choice to allow us to have a relationship with God. So it's not about just looking, but actually moving forward. And when we move forward through that right path of life, it actually brings us to the right source of life. I hope that we could even look at our lives up until this point and try to begin to identify what were points in life where we took the easy way and for whatever reason is bringing us further away from life, true life in God. But sometimes we have to take the narrow gate, which might even be the harder decision to make, but it will bring us to the source of life, and we will get to experience what life is all about. So I pray and hope that we could begin to look at life's choices as these two options of they either bring us more down a wide open gate that's not going to help us, or they actually bring us more towards a narrower path and gate that will actually bring us to the source of life, Jesus himself. And he never forces us down any one path, but he encourages us to stick it out, to strive, to agonize, to be on that path, because it's not always going to be easy to follow Jesus. And at times it's actually going to be incredibly challenging to follow Jesus, but it's always going to be simple to know what to do. We just need to have the courage to do it. May God bless us as we try to follow Jesus in our everyday lives, have the courage to take the stand for what we know is right. God bless.